Good afternoon, everyone. This is nice. We're getting into this part of the afternoon where, maybe a coffee or tea, some sweets, and then we can do some technical deep dive here. My name is Armin Briegel. I work with Jamf as a senior consulting engineer in the EMEA region. We cover everything from India to Portugal and a bit more. And you also might know my weblog, Scripting OS 10. And macadmins.news, because who has one weblog these days? We need two, right? For this presentation, I thought we'd have some fun. I picked a topic that might seem very simple, and people have already given me some comments about that. Usually when we give these presentations, we gloss over certain things, and it's like, yeah, we don't have time to dive into that. This time, I want to dive into that. And we only have 30 minutes or so. So even here, I have to skip over a few things. This is the first time I'm back in the UK after the pandemic and everything. So I thought I really should mention something that I find is very British and I appreciate very much and have appreciated very much during the past few years, and that is the show Taskmaster. I really, really enjoy that. If you're not familiar with it, the concept of the show is that there's a team of contestants, usually comedians, who have to do tasks that are posed to them by the taskmaster. And they are funny, difficult, and often quite demeaning. It's worth it. I believe it's on Channel 4. I watch it on YouTube. Go check it out if you haven't seen it yet. So this is our task for today. Our task is to set the computer name. Your time starts now. I will be talking about macOS and iOS, but because of the nature of the two platforms, I will be talking much more about macOS, but we will have iOS in the end. There will be a page, or there should be a page already, with notes and links on scriptingos10.com/macaduck2024. Because I do not like to litter my slides with links and QR codes. And so go there. You will also find a link to the slides there if you want to look at them. And once the video is up, I will link that there too. So the first question, whenever you get any task, should be why? Why do we have to do this? And sometimes we have to dig back pretty far. And I believe the reason, or one reason that why this is an automatic thing, we don't even think about, yeah, of course we have to set the computer name, but why, is directory services. Back in the days, NetInfo, Open Directory, LDAP, Active Directory, it's not so back in the days for some, I know. When you bind to these services, you need a unique computer identifier. And the systems usually use the computer name by default as the unique identifier. And even if we don't bind to any of these directory services anymore, the tradition kind of lives on. Another reason I hear is, well, so we can identify the device in our systems. In your management system, you should look for the device. How else would you identify it, if not by the computer name? Well, there are actually several ways, and any decent management system, put one up here as an example, will allow you to search by other things. Any decent ticketing, asset management, logging, whatever system should probably have the information like the serial number, maybe the asset tag, and maybe the department building or the user that's assigned to the device, and you can search for that. So for some of us, the answer could be, don't set the computer name. I don't care what the computer name is, just whatever Apple sets at the default, leave it. Don't care about that. Quick talk, let's go have a beverage. Yeah, well, I do think, and I know, for example, at Jamf, we do not set the computer name on our managed devices. So for some of you, that might very well be the solution. For others, yeah, and there are good points about setting the computer name. Even though we don't bind to directory services anymore, or we shouldn't bind to directory services anymore, having a unified label across many systems and we still, as the management system, have to integrate with many other systems, is a good practice. Something we would probably want to have. Management systems, security tools and systems, ticketing and service systems, logging, SIEM, other things. You can probably think of more. If we can have a unified device name across all of these, that simplifies so many more processes. So with that out of the way, how do we do it? Well, whenever I start something like this, I always look at how do I do this manually. And up to and including Monterey, this is what the system preferences pane looked like. We went to the sharing pane, and we could set the computer name. That was easy. When you change it here, it would automatically calculate a localhost name that it would set it to, removing spaces and other characters. You could click the edit button for a better setup there. With Ventura, we got the new system settings, which looks more like iOS. How did the Apple people say it earlier? The new system settings experience. You can still set the computer name. It's in general about, and even though there's nothing in this UI that indicates that that field is editable, it is. Same on iOS, so it has that going for it. This doesn't do all the thing. You can still independently set the localhost name in the sharing pane. That remains in the sharing pane all the way to the bottom under advanced, if you want to do that. One thing we got in Sonoma, which is really great for macOS, is we can now lock down the device name for macOS as well. Starting with Sonoma, iOS has had it for a long time, since iOS 9. Yep. And now we can do it with macOS Sonoma and up as well. So you probably want to set that setting so the pesky users don't mess up our device naming. Otherwise, you'll have to run it and reset it over and over, which we can also do. This is what it looks like in the Jamf interface. You'll find it under restrictions, usually in your management system. So you want to turn that off because the flag allows the user to do it. A bit confusing here. If you want to script setting the computer name, it's the scutil command, system configuration utility. Has a special set verb that is explicitly for setting the computer name and the related host name and local host name. If you're using Jamf, the Jamf binary has a neat shortcut for this. You can do Jamf set computer name dash name, and it will do all three in one go. Fairly easy. So, great. We're done. Let's have our beverage. But wait, there's something in here that we haven't clarified yet. What are we going to use for the name? I think a device name or computer name needs to fulfill these requirements. These are my priorities or my requirements in a list of priorities. Yours might be different. Your organizations might be different. But they're probably very similar. First of all, it has to be unique. Every device should get a unique name. Because if we have two devices named the same, then the entire point is mute. It should be persistent. That means if I wipe the device and run the process again, or if I just run the same process over and over and over, it should always get the same name. It's quite a challenge already. It should not expose any private information, personal identifiable information, things like that. I should be able to automate the process. The process should not require manual. I type the computer name into it, ideally. And I think it should be readable, because there will be situations, if we're sharing the device name across different systems, you will have to communicate with those teams, or the tech will have to communicate with you, and we probably might want to transfer that name over the phone or something like that. So it should be readable, shouldn't be too long, shouldn't be a, 64-character hex code. That would be horrible. There are generally two main deployment scenarios, and for this also, I don't want to split this in education versus business, because there's lots of one-to-one deployments in education, but the lab classroom deployment with shared computers is nowadays very typical for education, not exclusive, but very typical. In a lab classroom shared computer deployment, the devices are usually assigned to a location. A room, a building, a classroom, something like that. And during the lifetime of the device, or at least during long stretches of the lifetime of the device, that device is in one location. It won't change very often. The user who logs into it might change a lot, but the location will stay pretty static. So it makes sense to try to identify the location, the cart of the device, and then we have a counting number because a classroom might have 10, 20, 30, 40 devices, depending on your deployment. So that makes sense to use. Gives me some information, very easy to determine and predetermine. For these things, we need some kind of lookup table. We need to assign something in the device, usually the serial number, MAC address, something like that, to a name and location and all of these things. Comma-separated files, tab-separated files, whatever, fairly easy to use. You can download them with curl or install them in the package during the enrollment process. Then there's a few scripting steps here that I've sketched in here. With awk, you grab it, you find out the name that is associated with that serial number, and you set the computer name. And of course, you're halfway down writing that script, and then some smartass comes along and says, you're using Jamf, right? There's a command built into Jamf to do that. You don't have to write that script. So the -from file with a set computer name will actually do exactly that. It takes a CSV file, looks up the serial number, sets the computer name. But if you have to write it from hand because you're not using Jamf, it's not that big of a deal. There are other ways, and you will start thinking, like, I have to update that CSV file and have to push it down to the client somehow. Wouldn't it be nice if we put that in the cloud with a shared Google Doc or Office Doc, Airtable? We can use an API call to get it out of our ticketing system, ServiceNow or whatever you're using, or some other system where it's already in. And these are all great options. They're not that difficult to code. I have linked to a few blog posts where people have examples on these. Those are very, very valid functions. So for those of you who want to use lookup tables, who need to use lookup tables, go. You can really have a beverage right now. However, maintaining these lookup tables is hard. It's extra effort. Maybe even in these situations, you want to go the way I'm now sketching out for the one-to-one deployments, where we avoid that and have a fully automated process that doesn't even need a lookup table. So one-to-one deployment, I put light touch in quotation marks because you can still very strictly manage the device. But I say light touch because these devices are much more mobile. They move around. They're not in a specific building. They're not in a specific network. It is, except during enrollment, quite hard to actually identify where they are. They might actually even change users during their lifetime. So ideally, we'd like to identify the owner and the device, but there are challenges with that. But there's a few things that we want in there. It would be great if we could identify the platform. This is usually a request you get from outside. The support team or the security team will say, could you put a Mac in front of the computer name so that we can see immediately, oh, this is a Mac, and that means they can push the responsibility of it off to you. But it makes sense. I mean, this is the point. We have to work with these teams. We want to think about what is good for the other teams that are consuming this computer name. What is useful for them? For us, I actually kind of like to distinguish between desktops and laptops. It's nice if the desktops have just Mac, the laptops get MacBook, or whatever abbreviation works for you. You could be a little more detailed and get the entire device family, so iMac versus Mac Studio versus Mac Mini versus Mac Pro, MacBook Air versus MacBook Pro. If you want that kind of detail, that might be kind of nice. I talked about ownership for the identification. It would be kind of nice, and I'll go into a bit more depth, but that is personally identifiable information. And we probably don't want to use that in a computer name. And then there's things that distinguish the individual device, the serial number, the MAC address, the hardware UUID, possibly an asset tag. I have crossed out asset tag pretty much immediately because asset tags usually require some form of manual input. You can use a barcode scanner, it's still kind of manual input. If you have a way through APIs or something to feed the asset tag in automatedly, put that back on the screen. That might be a valid thing. Great. Are we done now? No. I have alluded to it with the username. And before we go into that, we should think about, well, we know how we want to use the computer name. How does the system use the computer name? What does macOS do with the computer name, or iOS for that matter? One of the things it uses it to register the device with iCloud together with the account. That's not something we're really interested in, something to keep aware of. But it does use the computer name to advertise local services. Media sharing, iTunes sharing, stuff like that. AirPlay, if you turn on the device as an AirPlay receiver, the Mac as an AirPlay receiver, it advertises that over the network. Same with screen sharing, remote login /SSH, or Apple Remote Desktop if you're still using that. All the services that come under continuity, Sidecar, Universal Control, Continuity Camera, these are great services. These are services that our users, that we want to use as users. As soon as you have any of these turned on, the system is broadcasting its computer name or device name over the network. Anybody who's on the same network at Starbucks or in the hotel or here in the conference Wi-Fi, depending on how the Wi-Fi is set up, but they might be able to sniff the computer name. So the computer name is not something that's private. That we have to be aware of. The service that broadcasts this is, of course, called Bonjour, or Rendezvous, or ZeroConf, or MDMS, Service Discovery, depending on whose documentation you read. And it is very, very hard to turn off completely on Mac and iOS devices. Possible, but hard. And our users won't like it if we turn everything off, because they want to use these services. So what's so bad about getting the serial number, right? I broadcast the serial number on the network. What's the big deal? There's a few things you can do with the serial number. One of the things is, this only works on Intel VMs, but Intel computers are still around. I can build a VM, impersonate that serial number, and enroll in your automated device enrollment. Okay, what's the big deal there? Well, a potential malicious attacker can see which software gets installed by default on your systems and sees all the vulnerabilities, all the versions, all the security tools, and has a great playground to have and plan their way of attack. This is fairly easy to protect against. Just turn on SSO login in your enrollment. Not all enrollments can work with that, but generally we can protect ourselves against that. There's another thing I can do with the serial number, and that is I can go to checkcoverage.apple.com, enter the serial number, and I can get the warranty status and quite a bit of detail about the hardware of that device from Apple. You have to fill in a captcha, but that's all the security there is on top of that. Okay, this allows me to craft wonderful spear phishing attacks. I can get an email from IT support telling me, your warranty on your MacBook 2020 is about to expire. Click here and log in so you can order a new one. How many people in your organization will fall for that? Quite a few, I'm quite sure. You can do it the other way around. If you get the serial number and a bit more information and the model number, me as a malicious attacker could call your IT support and say, hey, I'm here on my MacBook Air, serial number is this, and I can't log in anymore. Can you reset the password? Might work. So maybe don't broadcast the serial number. Same for a MAC address. Hardware UID, I couldn't really find anything, but it's big and unwieldy. We don't want to use that for the device name anyway. So that doesn't leave much. I can't name all the devices MacBook. That doesn't work. Not unique. So yeah, maybe we go back to the serial number and look at the serial number. Maybe there's a part of the serial number that we can use. And then I realized, oh yeah, Apple has different kinds of serial numbers depending on how old the device is. Between 2010 and 2021, and some devices that came out in 2021 were sold for much longer. the devices had a 12-digit serial number. And this is not entirely random. There were pieces in here, so the first 3 digits are the factory, the location where it was created. The next 2 digits encoded the year and week in which it was produced. And the last one actually encoded the model. So the only thing that's really serial in this serial number is these 3 digits in the center. So if you say, oh, I'll take a subset of the serial number, avoid the privacy issues, I'll take the last 4 digits, yeah, there's a lot of potential for conflict there. Same with the first 4 or 5 digits. So we have to grab the center digits. And those are actually pretty unique. Not entirely perfect, but unless you have tens of thousands of devices, this will work. We put the prefix on that the security tool wanted to identify Macs, and this is a pretty good start. Newer devices, starting in 2021, have a 10-digit number. Apple says it's randomized. I'm sure there's some logic in there, but I haven't been able to figure it out yet. But it's very much randomized. So we can basically take the first few digits, the last few digits. But to keep it simple, we just grab the center digits as well. Then we have the same algorithm for the old and the new serial number. Depending on your deployment, 4, 5, or 6 digits is totally sufficient. Add the prefix, and we got that. Alternatively, if you prefer hex numbers over alphanumeric codes, I recommend using the how do I UUID and just grab the last 6 or 7 digits. And that's 16.7 million configurations. So unless you get into the tens of thousands of Macs in your deployment, you're probably fine for not having conflicts here. And use those. I said we'd like to distinguish between laptops and desktops. I mean, you don't have to, but I kind of like that. The way we used to do that, and the way you probably thought first about doing this, is to grab the model identifier from System Preferences, System Profiler, like the MacBook Air 10,1, that's the 2020 M1 MacBook Air. Because I have everything in there. It's a MacBook Air. I know it's a laptop because it has the word book in it. The word book has been in Apple laptops since 2001 in the model identifier. It's really useful. Just look for book, it's a laptop. Yeah, this is great. So let's look at the model identifiers we can get from the machines starting in 2020. These are Apple Silicon, but this goes back, as I said, to 2001 or something like that. So this great MacBook Air, MacBook Pro, Mac Mini, iMac, MacBook Pro. We can get a lot of information out of the model identifier. The Mac Studio comes out. It has Mac 13,1 or 13,2. Well, that's strange. It's called Mac Studio, not Mac. But OK, that works. Next device Apple published was the M2 MacBook Air and MacBook Pro 13-inch. And it was Mac 14.2 and 14,7. And oh, wait, something's changed here. Ever since the Mac Studio, all Apple devices have the model identifier Mac. The first number afterwards actually identifies the processor generation. So M1s have 13, M2s have 14, M3s have 15. So far, that works. The number after the comma is the model and somewhat the configuration, but it doesn't even map. So the MacBook Air is one number in the M2 generation and another number in the M3 generation. So yeah, that's pretty much useless. Yeah, so we can't use the model identifier anymore. The good thing is, and I already put that on the screen, we can use the model name, and we can grab that out of System Profiler. But if you have old scripts that rely on the model identifier for these kinds of things, you really should revisit them, because they might have been messed up for a few years already. The command down here uses plutil to extract the information from the XML. plutil is great, but this is Monterey and up. Just a side note. In the sample script I will post later, there's comments on all of this and explanations. Total side note, irrelevant for the computer name because it's too much information for the computer name, but this is so useful for many things that I'm doing. If you want to get the long description of the computer, the marketing name that includes with Apple Silicon, the processor generation, the year it was published in. For example, to use in your login or enrollment app, use this very weird long command, but that will give you something like MacBook Air M2 2002. Very useful for dep notify or set up your Mac or enrollments like that. It only works on Apple Silicon, though. There is no reliable way to get this information on Intel without using a weird online API call that's undocumented and that Apple may shut down at any time. But Apple Silicon and onwards, this works. So let's put this all together. And I don't put scripts on screen because they're long, but from the document I shared earlier, and I will share at the end, this is the script. It grabs whether it's a laptop or a desktop. That determines the prefix. It grabs 5 digits from the serial number, but you can change that easily to 4 or 6 if you want to, and sets the computer name from that using the Jamf binary if it's present, or the sutil command if it's not on Jamf. So it works with other management systems as well. And that fulfills our requirements of its being unique. It is persistent. If I rerun it through several things, wipe the machine, or just rerun it multiple times, it stays the same. It doesn't expose interesting data. It doesn't expose the username. It doesn't expose the full serial number. There are several management systems that have a checkbox that says, use the serial number. Oh, yeah, that's great. Yeah, maybe you don't want to do that. It's easy to automate, and what comes out is fairly readable and easy to transfer over the phone if you have to. Can we have beers? Not quite. Sometimes you have to have manual entry. Some historical setups in your organizations may require manual entry. Maybe you can't get the data in a lookup table in some automated way, and then you have to have a tech or the user entering something like the asset tag or something during the enrollment or setup process. There are a few ways to do that. One is AppleScript, OsaScript. Great thing is I don't need to install anything extra. Not the nicest UI, but totally serviceable. There's Bart Reardon's Swift dialog, which can allow me to build a much more complex UI, much nicer UI, branded with explanation. I can prompt for more fields at once if you want more information than just the computer name, say the department or whatever. Totally check out Swift dialog. There's something we built as well in the CE team. We looked at this entire enrollment workflow and wanted to make that better, and we built a tool called Jamf Setup Manager. Our motivation there was we were looking at the deployment order, and most enrollment tools run on the user's desktop after the user was created. And then we lock the desktop, and the user has to wait. And we said, can we do that earlier? Isn't there a better place? Couldn't we do that right after the automated enrollment kicks in, before anything else is done? Isn't that the place to do our standard installations and maybe prompt the tech for a computer name or an asset tag if that's necessary? Only if that's necessary. And we built Jamf Setup Manager, and this is what it looks like. So this kicks in after you confirm the remote management. In this case, I am prompting for a computer name. We do regular expression verification to avoid some of the errors. I did this on the hotel Wi-Fi, so icons took a moment to load down. And then the installations already happen while the tech is entering the data. This is sped up, obviously. Microsoft Office does not install that quickly. This can run with manual intervention, but it also has a way of providing a computer name template that fully automates the process. So the user interaction is entirely optional. There's an About This Mac here, which allows me to identify some things about the Mac and the network. And then when it's done, it actually brings me to either back to Setup Assistant so the user can finish their setup process. We call it Jamf Setup Manager because every assistant needs a good manager. It is a native Swift app, and you don't have to edit scripts. you set it all up with a configuration profile. All the settings, whether you want manual entry or automated setting of the computer name, and which things you need installed and everything is in a configuration profile. It works with Jamf Pro and Jamf School. And we are currently in private beta because, as it appears, this is more than a shell script. This needs to be signed with the Jamf developer ID, and that through product and legal and everyone else into a TISI. And we're still determining how to best release this. So until then, we are in private beta. And if you want to join in, send an email to setupmanager@jamf.com. We'll ask a few questions and get you into the private beta. That's it for Mac. Now let's talk about iOS. iOS, from the nature of the platform, and this includes iPadOS, of course, but they're so similar. We can't script, and we don't have all the flexibility with the scripting. But we can set the device name on iOS with an MDM command. So we can call the MDM command using the API of our management system. And that allows us, again, to use scripts or automation. We just have to go through one level or two of indirection. One nice thing that we can use here is webhooks and a middleware. So how that works is when a certain event happens on Jamf Pro or your management system, like, say, a device enrolls, the management system sends a webhook, which is a message, to a different server somewhere. And usually there's a small package of data attached to that, so that the middleware knows, oh, a device was enrolled. The device has the serial number X and the computer name Y and things like that. Usually we use middleware. The hello world of middleware is we send a message to a messaging system like Slack or Teams, and then we get a message there. This is useful. We get a message there, this device enrolled. But we can do other things as well, because we can use the Jamf API to send a message back to Jamf and say, this device that you just enrolled, you need to reset the computer name. And then Jamf does the MDM thing to set the computer name. So we can script these things. There's middleware, which allows you to code in Python or other languages, and you can put all of the logic that I described earlier into the middleware. There's also some no-code solutions where you don't have to code. They're a bit less flexible. One thing we just recently introduced, it's for Jamf business customers, and right now the service is hosted in the US, but we can use it from Europe, just if you have issues with putting data into US-hosted services, you should be aware of that. We're working on expanding that, but right now it's US only. And Jamf Routines is a no-code middleware solution that hooks into Jamf Pro webhooks. Right now we have 6 workflows in there, but those will be continually expanded. But one of the 6 is rename mobile devices. So as soon as a device gets enrolled, you can set the name according to some logic in here. So check that out. I'm good on time here. So this was our simple task that we set ourselves, to set the computer name. But even so, it really sounds like a simple task, and it is a comparatively simple task. We had to think about integrations. Which other services will use this computer name? Which other services do we need to integrate with? Which other teams and departments in my organization will use this? We had to think about what kind of workflow do we actually want to have, or do we have? Maybe we don't have a choice on this. How does this fit into our deployment workflow and our overall management picture? We had to think about security and privacy. Those are big ones. Personally identifiable information, all of these things. This simple thing like the computer name is affected by security and privacy configuration. Everything is affected by security and privacy. We had to think about how this works in the network and had to know how this works in the network. We did a deep dive into Apple device history and the model identifiers and how the serial numbers work on Apple devices. And in the end, we talked about middleware and API. This is a lot of knowledge that comes into this very simple thing. This is organizational, institutional knowledge, platform knowledge, and the knowledge of the particular task that we as Mac admins and Apple device admins have to do. And all of this together informs that decision. And even if you have a management system that has a simple checkbox to say set the computer name, that does not absolve you from thinking through all of these things. You have to provide that and be the expert who has this kind of information. And now imagine I had chosen an actually complex and difficult task. So with that, we finally deserve our refreshments. Here's the link to the page again, where I'm linking to all of the things, including the script that I put together. Do we have time for a few questions? We have time for a few questions.
We don't currently have anything in the Hoover app currently, so does anybody have any live questions from the audience at all?
That's okay. I'm around. I'm scripting OS 10 in the Mac admin Slack, and I'll be around for the next 2 days here. If you have any questions, feel free to approach me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.